I wanted to talk a bit about some of the critical work that surrounds the album, and most of the writing about this album looks at it through the lens of the neo-soul movement, or scene, or genre, whatever you want to call it. So Erykah says herself that her two main influences were soul music and hip-hop, and obviously, as we said, she was an MC first, MC Apples, but you know, there's other influences in there. There's some jazz, some funk, some rock, blues, psychedelic music, whatever. Considering how broad neo-soul is under those conditions, like all the things it contains, is it a meaningful phrase for you? Is it useful? Like, what do you think these kind of genre designations represent, really?
I don't find it particularly useful. I think if I was at a party and somebody asked me what type of music I liked, I would never answer, "Oh yeah, I'm a big fan of neo soul." I'd say, "Oh yeah, true. I like listening to Erykah Badu. I've been listening to D'Angelo recently, quite liking that." I think maybe for those who don't know, the phrase neo soul was coined basically by, it was an A&R label guy, wasn't it? Called like Kedar Massenberg.
Kedar Massenberg, right? Yeah, he was the kind of architect behind her whole career, and he came up with it, yeah.
And he, I guess, branded his kind of collection of artists as neo soul as a kind of marketing tool. Do you think that would be fair?
No, that's absolutely fair, yeah.
So I mean, looking at the phrase itself, I think the word neo is quite key, because I feel whenever journalists or labels or media want to try and gas up a new up-and-coming artist, the literature and chat always revolves around this musician channels the spirit and talent of the old masters, but he's putting a modern, different spin on things, kind of like the spiritual handing over of the baton. Yeah,
well, people love to do that kind of stuff, don't they?
And that's not just music. I mean, that's sport, arts, anything. I'm thinking, for example, I watched a Boiler Room video the other day with the late great Tony Allen and Moses Boyd talking about Afrobeat, and there's clearly the same thing going on there. Or, you know, if it's the success of bands like Fontaine's DC and people saying, "Oh, post-punk is back, these are the new four."
Did I tell you this? I had a guy who came up to me in a pub and tried to convince me that Fontaine's DC were the new full. Did I tell you about?
I don't get that. I don't understand the comparison. It's just lazy media chat.
It's like any band that ever has any like backing vocals, quite prominent in their music. People will just be like, "Oh, the Beach Boys are back." It's like, well, like, really? You know what I mean?
It's weird, but going back to the phrase, I think that's what neo soul does as a phrase so well. And I'm not trying to sound like a knobhead here, but as a society, we obviously love putting things in boxes and genres. It makes it more palatable, and when there isn't that bracket, we invent one. And that's all neo soul really is to me. It's just a way for record stores, fans, whoever, to kind of categorize a certain type of music. And I'm not saying, "Oh, I hate this, I hate the word, it's stupid," but it doesn't. I don't find it very useful.
Okay, that's interesting. I mean, on the question of it being a marketing tool, undoubtedly it's a very effective one, because the fact that we're talking about it right now, and there is this idea of a collective of neo soul artists, clearly, like, Kedar Massenberg is like a genius in that sense. I think it has a bit of value. I do get a bit frustrated when people dismiss these things entirely. You got to remember, at the time when this scene was coming out, they were trying to distinguish themselves from some of the acts that were in the R&B scene that were on pretty shaky ground, like No Scrubs, Boyz II Men, Destiny's Child. That is not the same as Erykah Badu, D'Angelo, or Jill Scott, or The Roots. They're doing something different. I think is important to try and make that distinction. The other thing is, like, if just like very briefly, obviously artists hate being put in a box, and they hate being, you know, it's like, "Oh, I've transcended genre." Like, obviously I'm not just a neo soul artist, I'm a musician. That's great for Erykah Badu, because she can get away with saying that. Can you imagine if Tom Misch came out and said, "No way am I neo soul, bro, like, I transcend that"? He would be laughed at, like, rightfully so, you know what I mean?
But I think what's key with the neo soul argument is that, for example, you were just talking about the Erykah Badu mixtape released in 2015.
Yeah.
When that came out, she described it as trap and B, and said, "I've created a new genre." So maybe Erykah Badu isn't as reticent to be put in a box, but the difference is she's the one that made the box.
True.
Rather than this label fella.
Yeah, that's a fair point, isn't it? You know, she's controlling her own, has a bit of, you know, autonomy, rather than it just being in the hands of, you know, people and labels. But there's a good, to be fair, I think in this case, like, that A&R was like also very close to her, and was like one of the first really, really successful black A&Rs in that era as well. So that's something to to consider, I suppose.
Yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
Do you think that the term is still relevant? So ignoring the D'Angelo, Jill Scott, Erykah kind of era, do you think there's a meaningful neo-soul scene now?
I mean, I don't really know, man. I'm not a massive Tom Misch fan, so I'm probably not the person to be commenting.
I mean, I
think one thing I would say is with those types, with like the Tom Misches of the world,
the Jordan
Mackays, I think ultimately, if you're going to describe them as neo-soul, then it's just quite a weak distillation of the kind of people that were, popular back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like Erykah, like D'Angelo, like Jill Scott. So, if anybody said, oh yeah, there's this great neo-soul album that came out last week, I don't know, maybe wouldn't have such interest as if it was a Jill Scott record, for example.
I agree. I mean,
maybe that's pretentious.
No, I think you can I think maybe like the UK jazz scene more broadly is like maybe carrying that mantle to an extent. Pino Palladino's son is playing on a lot of those records. People like Yusef Days, Moses Boyd, as you were talking about. I think they're to an extent carrying the mantle, but again, we're obsessing over this idea of passing on the baton, and it's such an easy thing to kind of let yourself slip into, but maybe it's not that valuable. Anyway.